Hi, it's Posted Read Aloud number 8. So when we left off, Rose had just sat down with them at the lunch table, which kind of stopped all the conversation. She sat there because Wolf invited her, and she's trying to make conversation, trying to tell him to talk about normal things and ask what they're into. And when we left off, she was basically calling Bench a cheerleader because he doesn't play the sport as much as cheer on his teammates, which I don't know how that's going to go over. It's cool, Rose said. I happen to like male cheerleaders. This seemed to embarrass Bench even more. He pointed his finger across the table. Dee Dee thinks he's Lord of the Rings. Dee Dee wrapped his arms around his lunchbox, drawing it closer to his chest. Rose's eyebrows shot up. You like Tolkien? She said. Yeah, Dee Dee ventured. Kind of, but not really. All right. Maybe not that much. I don't know. Maybe. I laughed, only because I knew he had a shelf full of Lord of the Rings action figures and a replica of Sting hanging above his bed. But no, not all that much, right? Rose leaned closer to him. Who's your favorite character? Dee Dee looked at his lunchbox, at the picture on the lid. Aragorn, probably. If I had one, if I was, really into it, which I'm not really into it. He also had a giant framed map of Middle Earth on his wall. Rose nodded. Yeah, Aragorn's cool. Hold on, I'm going to pause while they bark, because that's what they like to do. All right. Yes, Aragorn's cool, Rose nodded. Reluctant, brooding king and all that, but personally I like Gollum. Wait, the weird slimy guy who eats fish guts? Bench dropped what was left of his breadstick, looking disgusted. Rose shrugged. Well, what can I say? I have a soft spot for the tortured and misunderstood. She smiled at Bench, a genuine smile, not a sarcastic one, and he didn't return it. What about you two? She looked back and forth from Wolf to me. I like short, hairy men, she said, so it's Gimli for me all the way. Rose laughed, coughing crackers crumbs across the back of her hand. It was the first time I made a girl laugh in any time that I could remember. It felt weird. What are you interested in? JJ here plays sports. It's Bench, not JJ, Bench said irritably. Right, sorry. And Dee Dee? She said, pointing. Dee Dee nodded. He's all about swords and sorcery, and what about the two of you? What's your deal? Wolf spoke before I could beat him to it. Frosty here is a poet. I am not a poet, I insisted. I wrote one poem one time. Wolf here is an actual piano prodigy. He's won a million competitions. I've won 11, Wolf corrected. I looked at him impressed. I actually didn't even know it was that many. Seems like something I probably should have known, though. Frosty, like the snowman? Rose asked, eyeing me. It's Frost, Bench corrected her. Frosty's better, she said. She stared at me like she was expecting me to agree with her, or if she was challenging me not to. I kind of felt warm all over, but uncomfortably so, and for a moment I was afraid she'd actually be able to read my mind. Bench pushed his tray towards the middle of the table and leaned on his elbows, and I could tell he was irritated. What about you? What do you do? What's your thing? Rose didn't flinch. Well, what do you think I do? She shot back. We all glanced around the table. Softball? I said with a shrug. Maybe that or wrestling. Lacrosse? Dee Dee guessed. Rose shook her head at each of us. Wolf snapped his fingers. Professional turkey wrangler. Rose snapped her fingers right back at him. So close. It's wombats, actually. And I don't wrangle them. I groom them for professional wombat breeding competitions. Really? Dee Dee asked, his eyes wide. It took him a moment, I think, as it sometimes does with him. Oh. No, seriously, Bench said. You seriously have to play some sport, right? Or work out or something? He didn't finish, but he didn't have to. I held my breath, waiting for Rose to take offense, to grab her tray and excuse herself, go sit down at an empty table. But instead, she just shrugged it off. No sports. Although now that you mention it, I'm thinking about taking up ballet. There was silence. Were we supposed to laugh? I couldn't tell by her sudden stone-faced expression, taking each one of us in, maybe even daring us to laugh at her. I tried to imagine her on the stage doing pirouettes or pas de bourrée or whatever, and instead I got an image of her lifting Dee Dee up and twirling him above her head and then dropping him across her knee and snapping him in two like a WWE wrestler. You guys know I'm totally kidding, right? Rose said at last, breaking the silence. Seriously, could you even imagine me in a tutu? Wolf shrugged. Dee Dee giggled nervously. I shook my head, maybe a little too emphatically. And then I looked at the clock on the wall and calculated exactly how many minutes we'd have until the bell rang so lunch could be over. Ballet, Bench snorted. Rose Holland polished off another cracker in one bite and then brushed the orange crumbs from her sweater. To each their own, she said. And for probably the third time since she sat down, I became conscious of all the other students in the cafeteria who all seemed to be looking at us, almost certainly getting the wrong idea. After lunch, Rose said she'd see us around. Her tone was casual, like she hadn't just contributed to 20 of the most uncomfortable middle school lunch minutes in human history, or more like she knew she had and she just expected us to get over it. That girl is funny, Wolf said after she left. Yeah, Dee Dee agreed, although he didn't seem sure. I looked at Bench. She's different, he said. I couldn't begin to get a handle on what he meant by that. I mean, it was impossible to disagree with, though. There was definitely something different and extraordinary about Rose Holland. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but Dee Dee gave it a shot. I mean, who doesn't eat breadsticks? He wondered out loud. Yeah, to each their own, Wolf echoed. I wasn't sure what he was thinking either. So you said not really into it, Bench said to Dee Dee, talking about that map of Middle Earth. Dee Dee reached into his back pocket and pulled out a stack of sticky notes. He quickly sketched out a stick figure wearing a football helmet and holding a set of pom-poms and handed it to Bench. On the top he wrote, Go Team. Bench looked at it and promptly crumpled it up and stuffed it down the back of Dee Dee's shirt. Then he threatened to find some real pom-poms and stuff them somewhere else. They tussled a little bit until Bench got Dee Dee in a headlock and noogied him into submission. I mean, they were just horsing around, I knew, same as always, but part of me wondered if it did sting a little bit, the way we were teasing Bench in front of Rose. For a moment, I considered the possibility that maybe he liked her. Maybe that's why he got embarrassed. I guess I'd find out soon enough, though. The next chapter is called The Nudge. Okay, I lied. That day at lunch when Rose Holland asked me what my thing was, I told her I only wrote one poem, which isn't true. One poem earned me my nickname, but I've actually written hundreds of poems. I keep them in a notebook under my bed, kind of like Dee Dee keeps his box of dice there. It's nothing special, just your regular spiral-bound notebook, college-ruled with a navy blue cover. I fill the pages late at night when I'm supposed to be asleep. The real Frost supposedly wrote his poems in an overstuffed blue chair, but I write mine by flashlight, belly down on my bed with my feet in the air. I don't bring that notebook to school with me because there are certain people, certain types of people, who might take one look at it and find a way to use it against me. I realize most kids wouldn't care. Some of them would even think it's cool. It's the few who don't and who read too much into one thing. Those are the ones who would make your life miserable. Those are the kids who wouldn't know a heroic couplet if it was tattooed across their forehead, but who would take writing poetry as an excuse to be mean to me. Kids who would steal it, tear it out of the pages, and read it out loud in class, tape it to the bathroom mirrors, use it to put up in toilets. They would come up with other nicknames, nicknames that were worse than Frost, nicknames that maybe started with P and poet would not be one of them. Some things are better kept to yourself, I figure. I don't share my poems with anyone. I don't share them with Bench, Wolf, or Dee Dee. Not because I'm afraid of what they would think. I mean, we play Dungeons and Dragons. It's hard to be embarrassed when it's the four of us. I just prefer not to share that sort of thing. We all need something that's just ours, a thing that we know absolutely about ourselves and that others would only be able to guess at. One day, I think, when I'm good enough, maybe I'll pull the notebook from its hiding spot between the mattress and open it up for somebody else to see. I will sound my barbaric yarp, as Mr. Sword calls, over the rooftops of the world. But I'm sure as sushi not doing it when I'm in middle school. I'm not an idiot. I know what words can do. Dee Dee broke out the sticky notes again in art class later that afternoon. We were sketching still lifes of plastic fruit that had been on the front table, taking the fake perfection of the glossy apple and the golden-tinged banana and making them imperfect again. Through our rough, wobbly lines. It struck me as odd making a copy of copies, but real fruit would have rotted before we even got around to finishing the drawings. I guess sometimes it's better to fake it. I was sketching a bunch of rubber grapes when Dee Dee peeled off the top note from his pad and gave it to me. Passing notes had gone extinct when everybody started sneaking their phones into class, but only 2 days into the ban, that furtive art of note passing had experienced a resurgence, and teachers were probably wondering if it wasn't better before, when it was just screens that were being tapped, and not elaborately folded sheets of paper being shuffled under desks like a gossipy game of telephone. Dee Dee stuck his post-it note to my sketch when Mr. Stilton, the art teacher, wasn't looking. What was that all about? The note said. I knew exactly what he meant. He meant Rose Holland crashing our lunch. I guess she needed somewhere to sit, I wrote back. It was the simplest explanation. It obviously was not the one that Dee Dee was looking for, though. As soon as I handed the sticky note back to him, he began to scrawl on it. Yeah, but why us? He wrote. That was a better question. Because she had a soft spot for the tortured and misunderstood? I don't know, because she knew somehow instinctively that Wolf would ask her to? Because I smiled at her first period even though I was trying to be polite, like how you smile at your waiter when he refills your glass and Not, hey, would you like to come sit with me at lunch because you're lonely kind of thing? Or maybe she thought we were the cool kids and she was looking to score popularity points. Yeah, that had to be it. I pointed to Dee Dee's pack of sticky notes and snapped my fingers until he pulled off a few for me. I had no idea where mine were. They were probably stuffed in my locker somewhere. There's absolutely no talking allowed in art. Mr. Stilton said it disrupted the creative energy flow that emanated from the artist's soul. We weren't even allowed to whisper, so I used my charcoal pencil, filling the top yellow square. Maybe if you hadn't shot her with an applesauce wad, I wrote. Dee Dee scrawled something quickly and held up his note for me to see. Not my fault. I didn't ask her to sit. I wrote back just as quickly. I didn't ask her to sit either. Dee Dee scribbled and flashed another note. Do you like her? I shook my head vehemently. Gut reaction. He shook his head back and continued writing. No, not that kind of like. I mean, would you want her to sit with us again? Again? Like tomorrow? I hadn't really thought about it. I mean, I assumed it was only a one-time only thing. Rose Holland was getting her bearings, like window shopping for friends. I'm sure tomorrow she'd sit somewhere else, right? And then somewhere different on the third day, and so on and so forth until she found her people, because that's how it works. We weren't her people, right? She had to see that. We were at maximum capacity with our four. I mean, sitting with us once was fine, but I can't imagine her fitting into our group. I mean, she was funny, sort of. And you kind of had to admire the gutsy way she just inserted herself, but she stuck out. I mean, she drew attention to herself, and that's a problem. Because who you sit with at tables for lunch matters. Who nodded at you in the halls? Who saved you a seat on the bus? Who signed your yearbook? It all means something. I mean, do you want her to sit with us? I wrote back, handing the sticky note to Dee Dee. But he didn't reply, partly because Mr. Stilton was making the rounds, with his polished shoes clicking against the floor, inspecting our handiwork. It didn't matter, though. Dee Dee's silence was answer enough. I mean, sometimes the truth is hard to admit. My mother was the one who taught me that if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, which goes a long way towards explaining why the house was so quiet after Dad left. Mr. Stilton stepped up behind me and looked at my sorry-looking sketch with a lopsided banana. Nice work, he said, which is pretty much all he ever says to me, whether you're a junior Picasso or some kind of kid who can't make a straight line. Maybe his mom said the same thing. If you can't say something nice, don't say it at all. And we will stop there. Until next time.